G'day guys, we just wanted to drop a quick video on the requirements for modifying motor vehicles with suspension change. So especially when it comes down to electronic stability control. Now we've been in discussion with a lot of the state departments, etc. There's a particular, I suppose, South Australia is particularly in discussions over this as well. But the ESC ruling for cars with electronic stability control is that post-registration, so we're not talking pre-rego with SSM where they're into NB1 category, but post-registration where the car was originally a passenger car and is now being raised to NB1, which is vehicles over 3.5 tonne, where the ESC requirement is not in that NB1 category. But what the states say is, if the vehicle's fitted with a safety function, you must ensure that that safety function works. Now there's a couple of triggers as to at what point do I require ESC testing. So it used to be 50 mil of suspension or 50 mil of lift, which included tyres. So you could go, the ruling was always 50 mil bigger tyre, which gave you 25 mil of lift. So you could run a 50 mil bigger tyre and 1 inch of suspension on an ESC car. Or in turn, you could run a 2-inch suspension and the standard tyre. Now, about a year or so ago, it was revised and they did a revision on it, and they said, especially like Queensland Transport and a lot of the other states said, you can actually go to 75 mil of lift. Now, that 75 mil lift is either 75 mil of, it's actually made up of 50 mil suspension and 25 mil of tyre. So 50 mil bigger tyre, 2 inches of suspension. Anything outside of that requires a robotic test. Now, there's no provision given under the ADRs by the states to test ESC, which is electronic stability control, by any other means than an ESC robotic test. You can't do a double lanes change. Lane changes do not test ESC function. Only the robotic test can test that ESC function. So the other side of the coin was a suspension change to a suspension type that's unfamiliar to that type of car. So for example, for JMACX, we do a 5-link suspension, which is 80 series, 100 series, 200 series. So the suspension type that we do is familiar to that type of vehicle, towing 3.5 tonne, etc., etc. However, if you were to change the suspension type, regardless of the lift, to something that's not a suspension type used in that type of car from a manufacturer, then you would be required to do ESC testing. So that's where it sits at the moment. So as an SSM pre-rego, NB1, no ESC required. So JMACX went out last year, we did ESC testing on our 4-inch and 35s, and we just could not get a pass. The center of gravity on these cars is just too high, they're not wide enough. It didn't matter how we coded it with different changes of shocks and coils, etc. We could not get a pass on that car for 4-inch and 35s. However, what we're going to do next week, we're sending this car up to AEP in Townsville, who have an ESC robot and are able to do the ESC testing. From what I'm aware, they're the only ESC facility in Queensland. So obviously there's an ESC facility in Melbourne as well. But we're going to send this car up. We're going to start at a 3-inch and a 315. So that's the sort of stuff that we can push post-rego. So we need to get an ESC pass on that so that we can approve lifts higher. And then we'll work backwards and work out exactly what point we can pass that ESC and go. I suppose the big one that we're seeing for people, we had a person come to us at the show, and this is not uncommon. I've got a quote off a company to do a 75 mil lift and run a 315 tyre, and I'm paying him X amount of dollars with a lanes change test, and it's going to get approved. Doesn't work that way. You cannot approve ESC without using a robotic test. To give you some, I suppose, scope, that test is a $20,000 plus test. It's not cheap. It has to be done at a track. It has to be done by an authorised test facility. There's heaps of detail that goes into it. Unfortunately though, that's where we're faced now. When it comes to new safety features in cars, all of this is just going to get harder and harder. So airbag compliance, you know, safety feature compliance, like things like ESC. ESC is probably one of the biggest changes that we face as a vehicle modifier when it comes to modifying these vehicles. So JMACX as a business, we want to go out there and show what we can do at that high-end level of manufacture, so that we can be compliant and then go to these states and get our compliance done for the customer at the end of the day. So, you know, that's what we're off to do next week. But, you know, I suppose the understanding for the general person would be, how do I get my ESC car, change of suspension legally post-rego to a different type of suspension? And then at what lift point is it then I have to then comply? So, you know, if you're getting a suspension type that's not common to a Land Cruiser, for example, as far as when I say common, it doesn't come from Toyota or a similar vehicle, then that would be in question. That is regardless of lift. You don't even have to lift the car. Change of suspension would then instigate, you need an ESC test. Lift over 75, which would be 2 inches of suspension and 25 mil of tyre, so 50 mil rolling. Anything over that, ESC test. Anybody that's saying to you, I can do a lanes change and put codes on your car, cannot happen, is not compliant. At the end of the day, you're the one that will lose out, because when you do get pulled over or you have an accident or you have a problem, as the owner, you're responsible for your car. So look, we'll do some footage on this as it goes up, and we'll show you what's involved. We have done one previously, it'll be back in our videos, but watch this space.